Hi, my name is Amanda Panacea, and you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This is a community for self-healers, biohackers, practitioners, and any other helping professionals. You're in the right place if you're seeking conversations about how pain becomes passion, the connection between physical, energetic, mental, and our spiritual self, finding your body's ancient wisdom, the latest biohacking technologies, clinical research, and if you just want to nerd out about complex biochemistry and quantum physics. But this is also for entrepreneurs who seek infinite abundance and a supportive community. So pour a cup of King coffee or Sisters tea and let's join the revolution. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Healer Revolution podcast. I am your host, Amanda Panacea, and I am thrilled today to introduce one of my friends, Hailey Gill. Hailey is a certified health practitioner, holistic health practitioner, and mind-body-spirit release practitioner that helps clients get to the root of their physical, emotional, and spiritual health issues. Her passions include learning and educating others on the spiritual and emotional root causes of disease and how they tie into physical root causes. Her number one priority is helping others heal in a way that provides lasting results and gives them the tools to remain happy and healthy long after working with her. She has a really unique niche in this space with doing spiritual inner healing work, and I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am super thrilled to be introducing my friend Hailey Gill to my podcast, The Healer Revolution. She is somebody that I've collaborated with, I really look up to, and I also see her on occasion for root cause, mind, body, spirit release, and her spiritual inner healing work that she's been doing. So I'm really thrilled to have her explain like her background, how she got here, and what all of those modalities are and how you could look into them and benefit from them as well. So hi, Hailey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. Yeah, I'm thrilled to hear your story because even though I know you pretty well, I really don't know the nitty gritty of how you got into the health and wellness space. All I know is that you were ridiculously sick. So by all means, have the floor and go into as much detail as you'd like about how you got here.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. So there is just so much. So I will try to fit it all in and explain the most important pieces. So I'll kind of go back to where it all started, which would have been in 2017. So 6 years ago. Almost 6 years ago. And so I was actually in the bodybuilding space. And so I feel like I was just very focused on fitness. I did not even know what natural medicine was. Like I knew nothing about that entire space. Never knew what chronic illness was. Had never heard of Lyme disease. Had never heard of mold toxicity. Like I was just in a completely different area of life. I was just focused on like lifting weights and having fun. Like that was just not my focus at all. And so I was really healthy my whole life. The only thing that really I had as like a younger child was chronic sinus issues, which now I understand and like know where it came from. But that was really the only symptom that I would say like manifested prior to 5 years ago. And I felt really healthy on a daily basis. And then it was almost an overnight like flip of the switch. I can remember I was in the midst of like bodybuilding and, going to the gym like 1 to 2 times a day. I would run with one of my guy friends at night, and we would run like 7 or 8 miles just for fun. And I remember I was always faster than him. Like he was trying to keep up with me. And within that 2-week time span of him and I running together, it went from like 7, 8 miles a night to him trying to keep up with me to like, I could not run. And he even noticed, he was like, what's wrong with you? Like I was not able to keep up with him. We would do like 2 or 3 miles. Like it was just like a drastic change. And like, that's when the chronic fatigue set in. And that's when I first started to notice symptoms. So for me, it really first started with just like this really chronic fatigue. And it happened fast. Like I from there, then like I couldn't run at all. And then it was like, I was napping multiple times per day. I was always sleeping, like napping 5 times a day was my normal. I was always sleeping and I was so fatigued all the time. And it was like, even when I was awake, I was just in this like almost fog where you're like, I'm in another world because I'm not actually like mentally here. And so that's when I first started, I feel like seeking out like Western medicine and doctors. And once the fatigue happened, that's when like all the gut issues started. And one of my biggest issues the entire time was always, it was very targeted in my gut, like fatigue and gut. And that's the first symptoms that it started with. And so I just remember, I mean, I was so written off by Western medicine. I think I tried going to Western medicine for the first maybe 2 years, probably it took me, of trying to find some answers and not really making progress. And I just kind of dealt with the symptoms at that time. Like, the doctor had no idea. They did say Epstein-Barr virus, which I feel like is so common with people getting that like diagnosis off the bat. And with the gut issues, basically I had just bloating from everything that I ate, and food made me really tired. So I would eat and I would actually immediately fall asleep. So, and at the time, again, I was eating like 5 times a day. And so I would sleep after every single meal. So I could like wake up at 8 a.m. and eat breakfast and I'd fall back asleep. And so I was trying to I'm working at a Big Four consulting firm at this time too. And thank goodness I was working from home. I was like adapting my work schedule around my nap schedule. So I would like wake up and like work a little, eat, and then take a nap, and then, work a little. Like I'd be like napping in between meetings, and it was really bad. And then I was still trying to work out at the same time. And I was just like, what is wrong with me? And, then I had the brain fog set in. And then, so that lasted for, I would say, a couple of years. And then I actually found a guy who did more, I guess you could say more like naturopathic medicine. I found him through the bodybuilding world though. So, and he was very focused on gut issues. And so I was like, this is it. I have SIBO. That's what he told me. And that's the issue. Like, we just need to kill bacteria. Well, he had no idea about any other root causes except for bacteria in the gut, because he worked with like bodybuilders. I had Lyme disease and co-infections. I was hiding in biofilms. He opened the biofilms to address the gut bacteria for SIBO. He never mentioned Lyme disease to me. This is things I figured out years later. I got so much worse because when we opened the biofilms, it released all the bacteria. That was like, I feel like, yes, I had Lyme, but it was in biofilm, so I was kind of protected. Well, he opens up the biofilms with like using biofilm busters for gut bacteria, and it released all the Lyme. And at the time I was living in mold. So that's like when the true crash happened, where I went from, I had gut issues and I had fatigue, but I was like, somewhat managing it, to just like all out crashed. And so then from there, it was another, I think, year of having no answers. And so I was trying to do everything on my own with like eating the carnivore diet, so it was probably 1.5 to 2 years actually that I was doing that. And I was just like I just knew that was all I could eat without having really bad symptom flares. And it was actually the Lyme and the co-infections that were flaring, and the mold. So I'm still living in mold. I didn't start doing what I do and find out about mold or Lyme until after I moved out of the mold. So the whole 4 years that I was there, I was just miserable. And I was dealing with Lyme and co-infections, mold toxicity, bacteria, candida, parasites. I had everything, and I was living in mold, and I had no idea about any of that. And I can remember when I was in there, it was like, just if I would eat carbohydrates, I would feel so drunk that I was like swaying side to side. And at the time I thought it was like blood sugar regulation, because again, I had no idea what was going on. And I lived not down the street, a block from the like grocery store. And I was like, I need to get to the pharmacy counter to have them check my blood sugar. And I literally couldn't walk one block. Like I was like, someone that I know is going to see me and think I'm on drugs. Like I'm like swaying side to side. So I finally get there. And in the meantime, my parents were like driving down to the city, because I'm so unwell and I have no idea what's going on. I just feel like I'm on like drugs or something. And I'm like laying on the pharmacy counter, just asking her, please just check my blood sugar. And they're like, we're not even like allowed to do that. Like I'm like literally just like incapacitated on the pharmacy counter. And so they got me like juice and stuff. And like, of course, it did nothing because it wasn't my blood sugar, but I just remember it being, it's such a scary time because it's like, you have no idea what's going on, but you're just, that it's bad. Like I was like, this is really bad, but I have no idea what's going on and I'm not getting any answers. And yeah, I mean, it was to the extent of like, I would talk to a doctor in Western medicine and there was this one doctor that she told me that my bloating was just gas. And I was like, ma'am, I am 6 months pregnant every day. And she was like, it's just gas. So it was, it was to the extent of gaslighting where you're like, I don't have health insurance right now because that is the extent that I refuse. I'm like, there's no value in that to me. And so, yeah. And so at that point I was like, I'm not working with Western medicine. I had a bad experience with the person that I worked with from, naturopathic medicine. And so then I was like, I'm just like on my own over here. And so, I'm doing the carnivore diet and I just knew that God was going to provide me the answers. Like I never stopped searching. I would listen to health podcasts, honestly, all day long. That was the only thing I did was listen to health podcasts. And it's actually crazy to me because I listened to health podcasts for probably 3 years before I heard about Lyme or mold, which I do feel like now it's a lot more common to talk about. But maybe I was just listening to the wrong podcast, but I think there's more of an awareness now. But like 4 years ago, I actually don't think it was as common as it is now. And there wasn't as much awareness. So it was like, I knew so much, but I was still missing these massive puzzle pieces. And basically one day, I don't even know how I found this on Instagram, but I found someone doing muscle testing and I just like, God was just like, it was like, I know that this is it, like there wasn't even a question. I was like, I need to do this. And I actually just started like muscle testing, like pretty much that day. Like I remember going into my kitchen and getting like bread and being like, is this good for me? And then like getting something else and being like, is this good for me? And I started with sway testing. And so I started testing foods first. That was the first thing that I did. And I was working with somebody at the same time as this too. And she was like the first person that said, oh, you have Lyme disease and co-infections and you have mold toxicity and you have all this stuff that I had never even heard of. And I'm like, this is it. It makes so much sense now. And that was really what started my then 2-year journey of healing because now I actually knew the root causes. And so basically what that process looked like was going, in the right order of root causes. And at this time, I'm now like muscle testing myself and really confident with it and, doing the dosing for supplements. And so then I feel like I started feeling like I was making progress, but also there were so many setbacks throughout those 2 years with just detoxing and the way that detoxing works, where, I was working on Lyme and I just felt so inflamed and so puffy and just like I was almost like getting worse because of how I had so much toxicity in my body. So it was like naturally when I started releasing things, it was like my body almost responded worse. And it was really like 2 years of working through the root causes to figure everything out and actually detox my body. And so basically what that looked like was starting with one drainage pathways. So opening up the drainage pathways. And then I worked on parasites first. And I did an initial parasite protocol. I ended up addressing them later on again, like in heavier dosing, but I did that before I went to Lyme. And I kind of did Lyme and mold at the same time. And that was a long process. My first Lyme and mold protocols that was probably like 6 to 9 months, I think, of doing Lyme and mold. And like there were some more parasites added in there too. And I feel like after that 9 months of working on all of those root causes, then I was making progress. But the things that didn't change that much or didn't like fully improve was the gut. And I feel like fatigue got better. A lot of brain fog was gone, which was amazing because I used to live in a constant state of brain fog and it was awful. And so I feel like I had so much mental clarity, but my body was still super inflamed. My gut was still super bloated. I feel like those are my main symptoms. And so it was like, okay, 9 months later, I've done a lot of the detoxing, but I'm still not making progress on these areas. And I still definitely had like bacteria in my gut. I had Clostridium bacteria, so C. diff. Like I tested positive for C. diff through Western medicine. I had it for 5 years, which like, if you know C. diff, most people, it's like very serious and they need to get rid of it right away. But, and I've seen this correlation with clients, actually, the mold was keeping the Clostridium bacteria there. So it was like, until I got rid of all the mold, the C. diff would go nowhere. It didn't matter what antibiotics I took. So I still had all those gut issues still going on. And so that's when I kind of dove deeper into like, oh, it's emotions. And then I started working a lot on emotions. And I do feel like at that time I did make improvements with my gut and inflammation, which now that I've been doing this with clients, I've seen, and it makes sense because the emotions can actually keep some of the root causes in the body. And when you detox the emotions, then it releases some of the root causes that otherwise wouldn't leave. So if you think of emotions like self-hatred or things like that, where the body's actually like almost telling it to like hold on to like the mold or bacteria for that reason. And so then once I started working on the emotions, then I feel like, okay, I got like a little bit more of healing and a little bit more of the gut issues were able to be addressed, but it was still like, I was not at 100%. And then that was like the next step in the journey. And at this time I'm seeing clients too, and seeing all the correlations with clients and with myself. And so then that was the more of the spiritual step then, where it's like, okay, this is like deep inner work, like working on the heart, going all the way back to childhood, like traumas that you didn't even know affected your heart, like your worthiness, your ability to accept love, all of these different things, from like a very young age. And then that's when I really started working on like the spiritual piece and like the deep trauma and inner healing. And that was very much like God walking me through the process. Like I didn't actually even work with anyone for it. It was like God showed me everything, and like he showed me the entire process. And that was like a 5-month journey. And when I did that, that is what unlocked like everything that was still in my body that would previously not leave. And now I know why, because it was like God was basically saying like, I care too much about like your heart and the fact that like you're actually healed and whole on the inside. And I know that if like some of this stays in your body, you're not going to stop searching until you find it, because you're just he knows I'm like that. And so it ended up being like the biggest blessing in disguise. And it's like, okay, I see how like, he took like beauty from ashes, and like this story that was absolutely awful to go through. It's like, okay, it actually did turn into something beautiful. And like, now I feel more healed and whole than ever before. And I'm like actually thankful that my physical body had illness, because it took me to this such deep level of healing and freedom that I otherwise would have never found. Right. And it was really cool to experience, because when I started doing this like deep inner healing, I've never detoxed so much. And it was so crazy, because like all this mold that I thought I had mostly gotten rid of was actually just like deep in tissues, and until I worked on the heart, it wouldn't release it. And I went through the craziest mold detox for probably 4 to 5 weeks of just like 16 scoops of carboxy a day, seriously. And the more heart work that I would do, and at this point, I feel like I took a huge step back in work. I was always still working, but I took a huge step back in how many hours. And like my daily life was inner healing with God for like 10 hours a day. And so I was obviously also just like detoxing so much trauma and like emotions and deep inner healing, but it was unlocking so much of the physical too. So I just went through this massive detox period. And that was the first time that my gut actually started feeling better and not inflamed. And a bunch of inflammation left my body, because it was like this last piece of like, okay, once you do this, the remaining of the mold and the bacteria and everything is just leaving. So it was really cool to see just the way that the spiritual and the emotional and the trauma and the physical, it kind of like all came together at the end and just all detoxed at the same time. Yeah, that was the first time that I'm like, okay, now I actually feel healed and whole, and like there's always work to be like done. But I don't feel like I have these like lingering issues that I can't access. Whereas before I was like yeah, I made so much progress in these other areas, but I just still have this symptom, or I still feel stuck here. That was really what changed it all for me. And it's been so cool because now the exact process that God showed me is what I use with clients in inner healing. And now I see so many of the similar correlations with clients with just, people that have been doing protocols for so long and made some progress, but not fully. And then when I, am testing them or just asking God, like, what needs to be worked on, it's mostly the heart. And then the physical is this like tiny little piece that's still left over. And then I've even seen with clients the same thing as me, where it's like, they've already done mold protocols and it wasn't really showing up anymore. And then once we worked on the heart, all of a sudden they're detoxing a ton of mold that they couldn't before. So I've actually seen the exact same thing happening with clients that happened with me too. So it's so cool how that works, where it's like, once you experience something, you just, God just brings the clients in that have the exact same needs, and you just see all the correlations. So yeah, that's kind of like the whole journey in a nutshell. But if you want to, if you have any questions on specifics, then I can definitely dive in deeper too.
Yeah. Wow. That's so much. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Yeah. You made so many really good points. Some of the biggest things that really stand out to me is that just how traumatic going through any kind of health issue is. When I first started getting sick, I was like, I'm a therapist. I don't have to do the brain retraining stuff. I already know all about this stuff. I don't need to do it. And of course, it was the number one thing that I needed to work on, because that whole situation in itself is so traumatic. There's no way you can escape doing the trauma work, the emotional work, the spiritual work after that, because you are traumatized.
Yeah. I have so much compassion for anybody going through illness. I know for me, I think the biggest thing for me was, it was the not knowing, where you're just, because a lot of this stuff was so far out of my awareness, where I just had no idea. And I can just remember just there was this time period where, for some reason, I remember it specifically with church, but I would cry in church every Sunday, because I was just I feel so alone, and I feel so there's something so wrong within me, but nobody knows. And it was almost this, no one can help me type of thing. And it's I just don't even know what the next step is or where to turn. And there's also just this block too with people that haven't gone through chronic illness or don't know about it, where it's almost frustrating to explain it to people, because you're no, I'm doing all the right things. There's just this major block, and you almost just feel so isolated, because you're I can't really talk to people about this because they don't understand, but I also don't understand. And I also don't know how to get help. So yeah, it's a very dark and lonely time, but I'm also now I'm whoa, life feels so good every day, because I'm just so grateful to be where I am today after going through what I've been through. So there is that also silver lining, where you're yeah, I have a lot of gratitude for just how I am now. So.
Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you can really see how resilient you are. You figured everything out on your own. And I don't necessarily think that happens for everyone, at least with the physical stuff. I don't think you need to go, every single person needs to go back to school, but there is that sort of responsibility that everybody does have with the emotional part, with the spiritual part, that nobody's going to guide you through that. You will always have to figure that out on your own.
Oh, absolutely. And, it was really funny. Even when you were saying that you're a therapist, but the brain retraining was a major thing that you needed. Yeah. I still laugh so hard to this day, because if you would have told me 4 or 5 years ago that emotions were a big piece of my, why I had illness, I would have not believed you. Because there's also this block to awareness, right? And, now that I've been through everything that I've been through, and and I've seen it with clients, I've seen it with myself, and now I understand the spiritual and emotional connection to the physical. But I also, and I think it's talked about more now, but I also think there is just a lack of understanding that a lot of people have, that, yeah, an emotion can actually cause a physical reaction in the body, and spiritual issues cause physical reactions in the body. And I just laugh, because I'm I had no idea back then. And now that most of my healing came from the spiritual and trauma and emotional, it's almost funny to me, because it was just, but it took me years to figure that out. And I even had a client the other day, and it was a man, which is funny because sometimes we make jokes that like men are more disconnected from their emotions. But I always, at the beginning of root cause consults, will tell someone, well, this is like the spiritual and this is the emotional, if I think it's a big deal or not. And for him, I mentioned emotions and he was like, yeah, no, that's definitely not part of it. And I was just laughing so hard because I was like, that I'm like, that's how I was too. And, people just like, they think they have no emotional issues, but we all have emotional issues that need to be worked on. So yeah, it applies to everyone.
Oh yeah. For me, I learned at a very young age to shut down my emotions. And so people would always describe me as like super chill. I never get angry. And of course, bottling that stuff up is like the number one reason people get sick too. The people that actually like learn to let it out and move through those emotions, like have a much healthier relationship with their body, and that mind-body connection is much more strong. So that I explain this to a lot of people. Have you had to give up coffee for health reasons? Maybe because of the stress it was putting on your adrenals, maybe because it was messing with your sleep, maybe because you felt terrible after drinking it, or maybe because you were told coffee had mold on the beans and you needed to stay away from mold. Well, what if I told you there's an organic, mycotoxin-free, quality coffee that contains reishi spores or Ganoderma lucidum? Ganoderma lucidum helps to modulate your immune system, adapt to stress, balance hormones, and doesn't give you the jitters or shakes like regular coffee used to. Sounds too good to be true, right? It's called King Coffee by the company Organo. And King Coffee came into my life when I was struggling with chronic hives, full body eczema, and mast cell activation syndrome. I hadn't drank coffee in years because it made me feel anxious, shaky, and clammy. So I had no expectations that drinking King Coffee would be any different. However, I decided to give it a try after seeing lots of amazing practitioners talk about the benefits of reishi online. I tried a 7-day sample and the chronic hives were gone by day 5. I was in shock. After that, I dove into the research on reishi and found that there are over 3,000 peer-reviewed PubMed clinical trials using reishi Ganoderma as an intervention. The company Organo also has a patent protected on their harvesting process. They double crack open the spore shells, which makes them up to 80% more potent than the body of the reishi, which is usually used in other reishi products. This also makes the spores 90% more bioavailable for your body to use. If you would like to try King Coffee, visit thehealerrevolution.myorganogold.com, or for a 7-day trial, you can check out my link tree on my Instagram at Amanda Panacea. Men are usually the ones that get heart attacks because that's usually their first symptom of illness. They suppress and hold everything in until like they have a straight up heart attack.
Wow. Yeah. Well, first, I have so many thoughts on that. But first, you and I are twins because that was me. People would describe me as like, she's so strong and independent and she can do whatever she puts her mind to. And I'm like, that actually came from like a trauma response as a child, like
exactly.
A super in my masculine energy. Like those aren't necessarily good things. And like you, I had no idea how to feel emotions. They were so suppressed. I had issues with understanding and feeling emotions my entire life, but I didn't even have the awareness that I had that issue because I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't even know what it meant to feel emotions. And that was absolutely a huge part of what led to having illness. And it usually does come from childhood trauma in some way, which I know for me it did. And it took the inner healing of like going back to childhood and working through all that stuff. And something that I think is so funny is through the inner healing process, like I said, I was very in my masculine energy. And that was something I always knew I was, but it was like, just like doing the exercises or like things that people recommend, like I feel like it didn't make a difference for me. I am so in my feminine energy now. Like I think I'm like 100% in my feminine energy just from inner healing with like doing the trauma healing, a lot of like heart healing, and like just improving my relationship with like God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And I am literally an entirely new person in every single way. And it's so funny to me because I'm like, who is this person? Like, even like down to little habits on a daily basis. I'm a good singer now, which I think is so funny. And like, it was directly due to healing my heart. And now I'm a good singer. And I was like, even down to the fact that healing trauma from your heart like changes the way your voice sounds. Like that's the extent of how much trauma affects the physical body. So yeah, it's been wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about men having heart attacks?
Oh, okay. Yes. I'm so glad you said that because I like forgot the thought that I was going to say. It just brought up for me a memory that happened. It was like a week ago, and I walked into the gym, and a guy had actually just like collapsed on the floor, and he was young, like he was around probably in his young 20s, but the Holy Spirit just like immediately convicted to me to like go sit on a machine near him and like pray healing over him, because he was like, like, this is emotional. Like, I just had this like deep like conviction within me that I was like, this heart attack is completely emotional, and like nothing they do for his physical body is going to work. And it's really interesting because there's been 2 other situations with family members and friends where they've had like heart issues over the past month, and like not overweight, healthy, but God has told me like the one, childhood trauma and major just like actual heart issues and emotional issues, specifically with his father. And he had triple bypass surgery. And it's like, well, it doesn't have to do with the fact that he was like overweight or eating unhealthy. It's this deep spiritual and emotional and trauma. And it does affect our physical body in that way. And then there was another guy where it was similar. And so, yeah, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because that's definitely something that's been highlighted for me over the past few weeks. And it's like, there's really no physical issue that isn't going to be traced back to spiritual and emotional in some way. Maybe it's just a tiny percentage. Maybe it's the entire issue. It depends on the person and the situation, but we have to remember that the body is so connected, mind, like spirit, soul, body, spirit, soul is all really one. And so for soul, it's mind, like will and emotions and heart. And so there's a bunch of different aspects that's going to be contributing, but yeah, there's just certain situations like that where people would think, oh, it's a heart attack, it's just physical. It's like, no, it actually could be emotional or trauma or spiritual.
Yeah. So I would love to really ask you a little bit more, I guess, on some of these root causes, because I feel like there's patterns in like the root cause world. And then there's also different patterns in like functional medicine and alternative medicine. And I feel like when you do actual energy testing, like what you do, sometimes you're going to see things that don't fit these like cookie cutter patterns that I guess people talk about with root cause. So I was wondering if you have any like super enlightening connections that you've come to find out, and like, besides obviously the spiritual piece, since you talked about that a lot, that being a big missing link. But even with like maybe certain events or emotions and symptoms or illnesses, like, are you familiar with German New Medicine?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So it's very specific, and it pinpoints an exact traumatic event with the presentation of an illness. So It gets super specific, and it's really fascinating. So I was just wondering if there's anything like that you've noticed.
Yeah. Well, I guess I talked about the like heart and mold. So that's definitely a connection where I feel like emotions similar to like self-hatred, or basically like if you think of the heart, what would be killing the heart, like bitterness, those, I feel like when the heart is dying, it's almost like telling the physical body to die in a sense, which what does mold do? It quite literally kills the physical body, where it's different from other pathogens, right? Like parasites can live synergistically, like mold is actually trying to kill you. So I've seen that connection for sure, where it's almost like if the heart is dying, it's like allowing the physical body to do the same. A common one that I feel like this one is talked about, but definitely like Lyme disease and co-infections is usually with trauma and certain emotions too. Parasites are very emotion focused. So it can be like insecurity, low self-worth, things like that. And it's like the parasite's almost like making up for this lack that people have. And so that's an interesting one, because you'll see people not even taking antiparasitics that just work on the emotional piece and they detox the parasites. So that's definitely common. Hardened emotions with immune system overall. So just suppressed immune system due to emotions in the heart. That's definitely a big one. Another one with heart too, candida and leaky gut is really common. And that's the thing. Candida is one of those where it's like, there's so much focus on candida and candida diet, and you'll see people talking a lot about too, like candida is one of the hardest things to get rid of. And it's, it's kind of always there. It's like always flaring up. And I've seen the heart to be like what really like breaks that cycle of people struggling with chronic candida. So like very trauma focused for that. Yeah, I think those are the main ones. I would say those are the main ones. I just feel like the heart is in everything, because the heart can be affected by the spiritual and trauma. So I feel like love is really the center of so much.
Yeah. Something that I learned recently from doing the program Primal Trust with Dr. Kathleen King. She's brilliant. She's been through chronic illness as well, but there was a module and she said, all resistance is because of lack of love. So either you don't love yourself enough, and that's where that resistance comes from. And I like burst out in tears, like, oh my gosh, that's so true.
No, I think that's so good. Like, I couldn't agree more. Usually when I'm saying heart, I'm referring to love specifically, because if you think about love, like you said, it can be like feeling a lack of love, being afraid to be vulnerable because you got hurt with love in the past, not knowing how to express your emotions because you never had like a safe space to do it, which is still like love based. A lot of like, just like being afraid to hope because you've been disappointed with love before, a lot of self-protection. So like protecting your heart because you weren't loved, having to like do it on your own, which is where I just feel like a lot of like performance and perfectionism and striving comes from. I feel like all the emotions that come up for people, it's like, well, the root of that, it was love in some way, like lack of love or heartbreak or something in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree. There's so much that some of these modalities work on when it comes to like trauma work and emotional work, but at the end of the day, it's all love based, and learning how to love yourself and learning how to love other people and learning how to let other people love you.
Yeah. And that just makes me think so much about just like the inner healing journey that I went on, because a lot of it was like focusing on events and like understanding, past, but a lot of it was actually just learning how to receive love. Like that was, just like the act of receiving love actually healed my body. Right. And like in my case, it was just receiving love from like God and Jesus in like a more of a spiritual sense. But that alone was healing. And so it's like, sometimes it's not even that you have to like go back and like do so much of like understanding and healing specific events. Like I think a lot of my healing was literally just like, oh, I'm loved. And I learned how to actually feel the emotion of love, because feeling love in the heart is different than just in the mind saying like, I love you, or feel like saying like, it's different. Like the mind is different than the heart. So actually feeling love for me healed my body, which is so cool.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about religion, because you've mentioned spirituality and God multiple times. And I don't identify as like a practicing Christian or any religious affiliation whatsoever. But like when you talk about God and use words like that, it doesn't necessarily trigger me, but those aren't necessarily the words that I use. And I've had another guest on, she used the word divine. Some people say like the universe. So I was just wondering like what your partake is on like that whole concept. Like, does you calling it God mean something different if somebody else calls it the divine or something like that?
Yeah, I think religion in terms of like denomination, none of that really matters to me. Like I don't focus so much on that. Like for me, it's an interpersonal relationship with God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And it's not so much about like what is the denomination or what is the religion. Like, it's the personal relationship. And I can actually say that I grew up in the church without having a personal relationship with God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And I think that so many people feel the same way, where it's like, you can read the Bible and you cannot have a relationship. And so to answer your question, like, I don't exactly know what that relationship looks like for people, And so, but I know for me, like, a big piece of my inner healing journey was actually feeling a relationship, like direct communication with all three. And yeah, actually speaking directly to and being able to feel the presence. I think those are two things for me that changed everything, because just being able to like read text or, know about God or Jesus, like that's not what we were made for. And so I needed to feel the presence, feel the power, feel the love, be able to communicate. And like, that's ultimately what I found. So I feel like that's what I'm so passionate about, because there can be so much out there that's just like focused on like rules and like trying to, perform or do this or do that. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's the relationship, and that's going to look different for everyone. So, but that's what it means to me. And I don't even know like necessarily what, it would look like in those senses, but that's like what I feel. And yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Klinghardt, he says that spiritual realm is just, it's called different things in different cultures and in different languages. But to me, I get that relationship is just you and with your God or your divine or whatever you want to call it. So thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah, of course.
And then now I kind of want to get into like how your business is set up, because you have a really unique niche. Obviously, you do the spiritual inner healing work. And I love that I feel like you became very successful very quickly. Like, you're talking about just 3-4 years ago, you were like deathly ill, and now you have a really thriving, successful business. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how you figured out like how to run it.
Yeah. It's funny because my answer is probably going to be so different. I was actually talking to a friend this morning who's starting a business, and she was asking about a business plan. I've never made a business plan. I've never had a website. So I have a lot of things where it's like, the definition of this is how you start a business that I never did. But again, I've always been very guided, right? Like, God has really guided every aspect of my business, of my ability to give people answers. And so I feel like it's almost not even me, but it's just like this kind of like gifting, like of God working through me. So that's honestly, I feel like how I had success from the beginning. It really wasn't me. And so, yeah, I just started posting on Instagram, and I never have like paid for advertising. I've actually never done a sales call. People just started booking on my calendar. And I feel like it's really beautiful though, because I feel like in a sense, because I just had so much faith, like I think faith is like the main reason that I've been successful, right? Because faith that I have, I'm getting the right answers for people. Faith that I have the ability to muscle test. Like, it is all very faith-based. And then also I think like in conjunction with that, just doing so much of my own inner healing and also being through everything on my own with the journey. I learned so much from myself, from clients. I was seeing, it was crazy. The first 6 months, I think I was seeing 10 to 15 people a day of one-on-one calls. So just by that volume, I was learning so much, right? Like you're going to, because you see so many trends and you see so many people and there's so many similarities. So I feel like part of it too was the fact that I was seeing so many people that I just got a lot of experience right up front. But that's what the first 6 months of my business looked like. It would kind of just like hit the ground running, like right off the start. And, I mean, honestly, I think because mine is so focused on like really just like getting answers from God and like muscle testing, it's not as much like research based. It's almost like I maybe didn't need as much like preparatory time, but I did have about a year of just like really attending like cell core workshops and understanding root causes really well. And I feel like that was a game changer for me, because I think there's so many other courses where they might not be that valuable, but the ones that I chose to do, I feel like were very like groundbreaking and really understood root cause. Go out of like the Des Bio seminars and Cling Heart. So I also think like that year that I spent was also just targeted on people that really knew what they were talking about. And so I had that good basis. And then I went very much more on the muscle testing side of things. And so it was like, I didn't feel the need to be like, oh, I have to figure out this client, because I don't even do any pre-work with clients. Like I don't look at any intake forms. I don't know anything about them. Some random person I've never met before literally gets on my computer screen and I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. But I also think that that's really cool, because it's like, it is very faith-based. And I think because I saw how accurate everything was and everything made sense, and I really never had any issues with that just built my faith more. And I just felt this like confidence of like, whoever gets on the other end of this phone, like God's going to give me clear answers for them. And it's going to be accurate because it's God. And the more that I did that, I feel like the more that my faith grew and the more that I was like, yeah, this is not me. So I don't really need to worry about like the way that I'm performing, or like, I need to figure this out. Cause it's like, I'm going to get the answers for what that person needs at that time. So yeah. So I feel like that's how my business was successful, was more so me just being like, I'm going to believe in faith that like God's giving me the answers, and he did. And the muscle test was really good. So yeah.
Yeah, you spoke your truth and people resonated with you, and then they trusted you and you trusted yourself, and makes for a perfect relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
So as of now, you still offer, what are the ways that people can work with you?
Yeah, so it's mainly root cause, MBSR, inner healing. Those are like the three modalities at this point that I do. And so usually I recommend doing a combo of, the main thing I recommend is really like root cause and inner healing. But sometimes I'll have someone start out with MBSR as like an intro to like how emotions work. And the reason I like people to do the combo sessions is because I've seriously never had a root cause client that didn't have something spiritual or emotional, because it's always interconnected. And so you really need both together, or else you're going to end up similar to how I described my journey, where you go through all the physical and you're like, wait, I'm still having these symptoms because you didn't do the emotional and the spiritual at the same time. So then you have to do the physical, and then you still have to go back and do the emotional and the spiritual. So I really like people to just combine them, because you really need to do them both anyways. And then, like I said, the detoxing of the physical body happens faster when you do the spiritual and the emotional with it. Whereas like, otherwise I just feel like you're not getting the full benefit if you're just focusing on the physical body.
Yeah, I agree. If you know anything about how the nervous system works, just as a basic, like we have our stress response and then we have parasympathetic, you can't go into detox. You can't digest your food if you're so stressed all the time, if you're stuck in fight or flight. So the way I kind of explain it to people is, if you're holding on to a fear emotion, like because of what happens in the world, because of fear of losing someone, and it could go back to fear of like literally anything, fear of weight gain, fear of something bad that happened to you that was traumatic happening again. So even just like fear of mold, that is keeping your body in that stress response. So that kind of helps people to understand like, oh, that does make sense. Maybe I do need to work on the emotional part.
No, that's so true. And when you said that, the first thing that came to mind for me is the clients that come in that test for like one drop of something, or like a 16th of a capsule, like every 3 days. It's like, the reason your body can't take supplements and you test for such low dosing is because of the nervous system. It's way too stressed out. Adding anything to it is just increasing the stress. So yeah, like you said, then it's like, you have to work on these other pieces first or in conjunction, because otherwise you're going to be taking like a 16th of a capsule or something for like 3 years, and you're not going to make any progress. So.
Yeah. Or it's going to make you worse. Then you're going to be worse off. Yeah. Awesome. So I want to go into like my final questions. And the first one is, what is your biggest lesson in life?
Okay. Biggest lesson in life. It has to go into just like the whole inner healing journey that I just had. But I feel like it's the relationship with God and understanding how to release expectations off of myself and actually be able to like allow God to fully guide me to this point where I'm more in this state of allowing and receiving and like trust and faith that like he's working it out for my good, because I feel like I spent so much of my life just like trying to do it on my own and working so hard to not get results. And like I said, being in my masculine energy. And now that I feel like I've been able to sit back and just be like, okay, God's got it and he's giving me the guidance and I trust it. It's just, I feel like it's changed who I am as a person. Like I just feel so much freedom and joy and peace. And I'm like, I don't have to do this life on my own. And it doesn't have to be that difficult, like that I'm making it. So that's my biggest life lesson.
Beautiful. That's super inspiring. And then lastly, I wanted to ask, what's your biggest lesson in business?
Yes. Okay. Lesson in business, which for me, it's going to be very specific to the healing space, of course, since that's what I do. But it's got to be just the more healing that I do on myself, the more benefits that my clients see too. And the researching piece is so important. And I still incorporate that. But I feel like also like sitting back and being like, I'm going to learn more about healing just through my own body and self and through God has been so beneficial too. And it's just opened so many doors. Like I said, I have this whole process that I didn't learn from anyone. It was just from going through it on my own and like being taught by God. So I feel like that's my biggest lesson in business is since I'm in the healing space, it's my own healing, and like being whole on my own just produces that much better results for clients too.
Oh yeah. Because you can only lead people through what you've been through. If you've never experienced it or you have no idea what comes next, it's going to be more difficult. And I think we're always going to attract like previous versions of ourselves in some way, or because they resonate with us. They see like, well, she figured it out. So let me see how she can help me. And then I thought of a last closing question. And this is something that I personally pondered a lot. How do you know when you're healed?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. So
because we throw that word around so much, healing, but like, okay, what's the end goal?
Yeah, I have a two-part answer for that, because the first part you have to say this, but it's like, you're always healing, right? Like we're never going to be at this place where we're like, I'm fully healed. I got it all together. This life, you're always healing. And if you feel healed, then, you're going to have this new curveball that comes your way, and then you're going to have to heal from that. So yeah, I think you're never fully healed, but I think the point that you can say, like, I feel like I'm in a good place where my main focus of my life is no longer healing. I feel like it's just, for me, I feel a sense of like wholeness and peace and joy and freedom and love that I previously couldn't feel. Like it's almost like a different version of myself, if that makes sense. And then of course, like the physical symptoms also improved, and I don't have on a daily basis, I do not have the physical symptoms that I had for 5 years. So like, that's also another piece. So I think it's also, there's a different part of healing. It's like the inner healing and the physical healing, but that's what I would say.
I love it.
Yeah.
Awesome, Hailey. Well, this was super insightful to your life. And also I'm going to go cry after this. I'm very inspired talking to you. I appreciate you so much. And I will link all of your handles in the show notes. But if you want to just let us know where to find you on the internet.
Yes. The only place to find me is my Instagram. So it is Hailey Gill Wellness.
Okay, perfect. All right. Any last closing thoughts?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, Amanda. This was awesome. And it's great chatting with you as always. And yeah, I hope people found some valuable insight, and especially those that are dealing with chronic symptoms that don't know what's going on, because you and I both we understand and we have so much compassion for that. So I'm just proud of you for having this podcast and spreading awareness, and just like, it's helping people so much. So yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to cry now. All right. Well, thanks, Hailey. Thank you so much for listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, please do me a favor and like, subscribe, leave a comment, anything that can help get this information out to more people who may be struggling. You can also find me online at thehealerrevolution.com or amandapanacea.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at amandapanacea. Thank you so much for joining the revolution.